Sometimes the only way to keep breathing is to become the thing that suffocates everyone else. The night my uncle handed me over, it was -22 in Winnipeg, and the heating in his truck had been broken for 3 winters. He didn't offer me his coat. He didn't say goodbye. He just rolled down the window to spit into the snow and told me to get out before Cade's men changed their minds about the deal. I got out. The cold hit my face like a door slammed shut. I was 26 years old, carrying a canvas tote with a broken zipper, wearing the same second-hand parka I'd had since I was 19. Inside that tote, my laptop, a dog-eared copy of a forensic accounting textbook, and the ledger I'd been keeping for the past 4 years, every dollar my Uncle Roy had borrowed from me, with interest I'd calculated myself, compounded monthly, entered in handwriting so small you needed good light to read it. I kept that ledger because I always knew it would end like this. Not here, specifically. Not a parking structure off Portage Avenue at 11 at night with black SUVs idling in a row and men in dark coats standing at intervals like they'd been placed there by someone who measured distance precisely. But an ending that looked like being handed from one set of hands to another. I'd known since I was 17, sitting across from Roy at the kitchen table after my mother's funeral, watching him count the insurance check. He hadn't even waited for the repast to be over. So I was not surprised. I was very, very tired, and I was not surprised. The man they brought me to was standing apart from the others. Not dramatically, he wasn't posed. He was reading something on his phone with the flat, efficient attention of someone clearing a task list, and he looked up when I was close enough that he didn't have to raise his voice. His name was Kade. Just Kade. The men around him used it the way you'd use a compass bearing, orienting themselves, confirming direction. He was older than I'd expected. Mid-40s, probably. The kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more durable. A face that had learned to be useful. There was a scar that ran from his left jaw into his collar and disappeared, and his eyes were the color of the ice on the Red River in February. Not blue, not gray, a color that doesn't have a clean name. He looked at me the way you look at a column of numbers before you start auditing it. Not hostile, not warm, assessing. "You're Roy Calder's niece," he said. "I'm Ivy Calder," I said. "Roy is my uncle by marriage. I want that distinction on record." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile. Just a fractional recalibration. "He said you were quiet," Kade said. "He's never met me," I said. That was true. Roy had taken guardianship of me at 17 and spent the following 9 years either ignoring me or finding new ways to make my life smaller. Quiet to Roy meant I didn't fight back in ways he could see. Kade looked at me for another moment. Then he put his phone in his coat pocket and turned toward the largest SUV. "Get in," he said. Not cruelly, the way you'd say it about a door you were holding open. I got in. The house was outside the city, past the perimeter highway, down a road that didn't appear on any mapping app I'd ever used. It was large and deliberately unremarkable from the outside, the kind of building that said nothing on purpose. Inside was different. High ceilings, expensive but spare. The kind of interior where everything present had been chosen and everything absent had been removed. No clutter, no warmth either, exactly, but no pretense of warmth, which I found easier to manage. They put me in a room on the 2nd floor. Clean, adequately heated, a window that looked out over a tree-line black against a navy sky. A woman named Orla brought me tea without being asked and told me where the bathroom was and that breakfast was at 7 if I wanted it. She had the manner of someone who'd learned to move through other people's crises without catching them. I recognized it because I had the same manner. "What am I here for?" I asked her. "Kade will explain," she said. "Can you tell me what Roy told him I was?" Orla paused at the door. "He said you were good with numbers," she said, "and that you owed him." I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop and looked at the ledger spreadsheet I'd built. Roy's debts to me. Roy's debts to other people, the cascade of borrowed money he'd been shuffling between creditors for years like a card shark who'd forgotten which hand was which. I'd been tracking it because tracking things was how I survived them. Give me a set of numbers and I could tell you exactly how bad a situation was. I found it more bearable to know. Roy owed Kade $430,000. This I had known for 8 months, because Roy's filing system was a shoebox under the bed in the spare room, and I'd been the one who did his taxes for the past 5 years, because otherwise they wouldn't have been done. I knew the exact shape of his debt. I also knew he didn't have the money. What I hadn't known was what he'd offered in its place. Now I knew. In the morning, Kade came to find me. He didn't knock, but he waited in the doorway until I acknowledged him, which was its own kind of courtesy. He was wearing different clothes, but the same expression. The one that didn't give anything away unless it chose to. Roy said, "You were an accountant," he said. "I have a CPA designation," I said. "I also have a forensic accounting certificate that I paid for myself while working nights at a call center in St. James, which Roy is not aware of because he has never once asked me a question about my life." Kade considered this. "Why forensic?" he asked. "Because I wanted to understand how people hide money," I said. "And because I grew up in a house where money was always disappearing, and no one would explain where it went." He leaned against the doorframe, not relaxed. Kade didn't seem like someone who relaxed, but making the geometry of the moment deliberate. "Roy's debt," he said. "You know about it." "I know about all of his debts," I said. "I've been tracking them since 2021. I have a complete picture of his liability exposure across 11 creditors, 2 of whom are also creditors of each other, which creates a circular dependency that I find genuinely impressive in a catastrophic sort of way." Kade was quiet for a moment. "I don't want you here as collateral," he said. "Good," I said, "because I'm not. I want you here because I have a problem," he said. "Someone in my organization has been redirecting funds for approximately 18 months. The amounts are small enough to pass a standard review. The pattern is careful. Careful means they know how audits work," I said. "Yes, and you want me to find them." "I want you to find the money first," he said. "The person follows the money." I looked at him. He looked back at me. We were 2 people who understood ledgers and what they revealed about the people who kept them. "What do I get?" I asked. "Roy's debt is cleared," he said. "And you walk out of here when the job is done." "Roy's debt being cleared does nothing for me personally," I said. "Roy handed me to a stranger in a parking garage at 11 at night. I need something that's mine." Kade's expression shifted again, that fractional thing. He studied me the way he'd studied something on his phone the night before. Efficiently. "What do you want?" he said. "I want you to tell me what Roy actually said. The whole thing. What he called me, how he described me, what he thought he was trading away." Kade was quiet for 3 seconds. I counted. "He said you were a liability he'd been carrying," he said. "He said you thought too much. He said you'd be easy to manage because you'd never had anyone on your side." I absorbed this. I'd known it. Knowing things doesn't always help. "All right," I said. "I'll find you an office. Not a temporary one. A proper room with 2 monitors, a printer, access to the full financial records of Kade's operations, and a lock on the door that I controlled." This last detail told me something. Either Kade trusted me more than the situation warranted, or he wanted me to believe he did. I wasn't sure which. Both were interesting. His organization ran through 4 legitimate businesses: a logistics company based in Thunder Bay, a property holding group, a consulting firm that appeared on paper to do very little and charge a great deal for it, and a commercial kitchen equipment supplier in Hamilton. The legitimate layer was thin but functional. The rest was structured in a way that suggested someone had read the right books and then improved on them. I was, professionally, impressed. I started with the kitchen equipment company because no one ever starts there. It's too mundane. It's the place you put numbers you want overlooked, buried under invoices for industrial dishwashers and walk-in freezer components, where the line items are large enough and irregular enough that a small diversion barely registers. I found the first thread on the 3rd day. A series of payments to a freight company out of Sudbury, small, consistent, occurring on the last business day of each month for 14 months. The freight company was real. The shipments it was billing for were not. The invoices were good forgeries, but they referenced container sizes that didn't match the pickup addresses, and the GPS logs for the corresponding vehicles showed those trucks elsewhere on those dates. $42,000, moved quietly over just over a year, in amounts calibrated to fall below the threshold that would trigger a secondary review. Whoever had done this understood the review process from the inside. I flagged it and kept going. I did not tell Kade until I had the full picture, not because I was withholding. I told him I'd found something and was following it, but because I'd learned that partial information creates worse decisions than no information. You need the whole shape of a thing before you name it. Kade came to my office most evenings, not to check on me, or not only to check on me. He would stand near the window and ask questions that were sometimes about the audit and sometimes about other things, how I'd learned to read financial structures, whether I'd always been good at finding what was hidden, what I thought of the Thunder Bay operation's margin compression. They were not personal questions, but they were attentive ones, and there's a difference. One evening he said, "Roy told me you were 26 and had no friends and had never left Manitoba." "I've been to Saskatchewan," I said, "for a forensic accounting conference." Roy didn't know because he didn't ask. Kade looked out the window. He thought he was sending me someone who'd be grateful for any offer. "I'm aware of that. You're not." "No," I agreed. "I'm not." A pause. Outside, snow was falling again, which in Winnipeg is less a weather event than a permanent condition. "Why did you stay with him?" Kade asked. "For 9 years. Because leaving costs money," I said. "And he controlled my mother's estate until I was 25, and by the time I had access to it, he'd borrowed against it so many times there was almost nothing left. I stayed because I couldn't afford to go, and because I kept thinking if I got my credentials in order, built enough of a foundation, I could leave on my terms. I almost had enough." Kade said nothing for a moment. "The person you're looking for," he said finally. "Do you know yet?" "I have it narrowed to 3 people," I said. "I'll know within the week." He nodded and left. I sat there for a while after he was gone. There was something disorienting about being in a situation this strange and finding it, not safe exactly, but cleaner than what I'd come from. Kade had not pretended this was anything other than what it was. He hadn't been kind in a way that asked something of me. He'd been direct, which is rarer than people think. I went back to the ledgers. The answer was a man named Theron Graves. He ran the logistics company in Thunder Bay and had been doing so for 7 years. He was careful, organized, loyal in all the visible ways. He had a good reputation internally. He sent appropriate messages on appropriate occasions. He was, in the particular language of these environments, trusted. He had also been quietly negotiating with one of Kade's competitors for the past 2 years, and the money he'd been redirecting was seed capital, building a fund that would allow him to buy his way into a new position when the time came to move. It wasn't the worst betrayal I'd seen. Roy had done worse with less imagination, but it was meticulous, and it was patient, and it had been running long enough that Theron had started to believe he'd gotten away with it. I had 3 complete binders of documentation by the time I was done. Transaction records, cross-referenced freight logs, communication fragments I'd found embedded in billing system notes where someone thought they wouldn't be read. The full picture. I brought it to Kade on a Friday afternoon. He read through it slowly and carefully. He didn't react dramatically. He turned pages, went back to reread sections, asked 2 clarifying questions. When he was finished, he closed the binder and sat with it for a moment. "Theron," he said. "Yes. 7 years. Yes." He was quiet. I recognized the particular quiet of someone recalibrating. Not surprised exactly, but processing the revision. It's what you do when a number comes back wrong and you have to re-examine every calculation you made that relied on it. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I confirmed it 4 days ago," I said. "I spent those 4 days making sure I was right, and you were right. I'm always right about this," I said, not arrogantly. "As a fact, the way you'd state that water moves downhill." Kade looked at me across the desk. "You could have brought me a partial result a week ago," he said. "I could have," I said. "I didn't." "Why?" "Because partial results in a situation like this get people hurt before you have the evidence to justify it," I said. "If I'd pointed at Theron without the complete chain, You'd have acted on instinct, and he'd have run before you had everything you needed to find where the money actually went. Kade held my gaze. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen there before. Not softness, something more like recognition. "The money," he said. "Back most of it," I said. 60 to 65%, realistically, without triggering the kind of attention neither of us wants. I have a structure in mind if you want to hear it. "Yes," he said. I told him. He listened without interrupting, which was the most respectful thing anyone had done for me in years, and I registered it without showing that I registered it. When I finished, he said, "How long will it take?" 6 weeks, I said. "If your people in Hamilton cooperate with the documentation I'll need." "They'll cooperate," he said. We sat in the specific silence of two people who have concluded a transaction and are both waiting to see what comes next. "The job is done," Kade said. "Mostly," I said. "After that," he said, "you walk, as agreed?" "As agreed," I said. He nodded. I started to gather my files. "Ivy," he said. I stopped. This was the first time he'd used my name. In 3 weeks, he had consistently called me Calder, the same way his men called him Kade, as though names were coordinates, not invitations. "What Roy said about you," he said. I looked at him. "I know," I said. "I want you to know that I know," he said. I held that for a moment. Outside it was snowing again. The tree line was dark against a low sky, the color of old pewter. "All right," I said. "Thank you." I went back to my office and sat down and did not let myself think too hard about the fact that a man I'd met in a parking garage at -22 had just offered me something Roy never had once in 9 years. The 6 weeks passed the way focused work always passes, faster than it seems while you're inside it, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from doing something real. I built the recovery structure. I worked with Kade's people in Hamilton, who were suspicious of me at first and professional by the 3rd week. I found another 63,000 that hadn't been in the original estimate, buried in the consulting firm's records in a way that only revealed itself when you cross-referenced it against the logistics company's Q3 filings from 2 years prior. I flagged it and added it to the documentation without being asked. Kade came to my office twice a week. The conversations shifted over time, less about the audit, more about the shape of things. How I thought about risk, what I'd have done differently with the legitimate business layer if I'd been building it from scratch. What I thought about the Thunder Bay operations exposure now that Theron was gone, and the position needed to be filled by someone who didn't know the recovery was happening. I gave him my honest answers, he gave me his. There was a strange equality to it that I didn't entirely know what to do with. One evening, the second permanent position, if you want it. I kept my eyes on my monitor, doing what I've been doing, auditing. Structure, finding things I haven't noticed. A pause. You'd have a salary, a proper contract, full legal cover for the legitimate side of the work. You'd answer to me and only to me, and the rest of it, I said. Because I wasn't naive about what the legitimate layer covered. You'd know what you needed to know, he said. No more. I thought about that. I need 3 days to think about it, I said. Take them, he said. He left. I sat very still and looked at the numbers on my screen. I thought about what I was being offered, not in a romantic sense. I was careful not to let my thinking go there, because that was the kind of thinking that got people into trouble in situations like this one. I thought about it practically. A salary, legal, cover, a role that used the skills I'd spent 7 years building in the margins of a life someone else was managing for me. A position where my judgment had already been demonstrated and was already, demonstrably, trusted. I thought about the alternative. I walked out of here, went back to Winnipeg, got a job at one of the accounting firms I'd interviewed with 2 years ago that had offered me a junior position I was overqualified for, sat in a beige office, did clean work for clean money, rebuilt slowly. The choice wasn't between safety and danger. I'd never had safety. The choice was between 2 kinds of risk, and one of them came with someone who'd read a 3-week audit and understood that I'd been right, and had said so. On the 3rd day I went to find Kade. He was in the main office reviewing something with 2 of his people who left when I came in without being asked. He waited. "I want a proper employment contract," I said, "with terms I review before signing. I want my salary benchmarked to market rate for a senior forensic consultant, and I want it in writing that Roy's debt is cleared and that he has no further claim on me through your organization or any of your associates." Kade looked at me. "Done," he said. "I also want an office with a better chair," I said. "The one I've been using causes lower back problems." The corner of his mouth moved. It was the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from him. "I'll have it replaced today," he said. "Roy found out 3 months later. He drove 3 hours from Winnipeg in that same truck with the broken heater and showed up at the gate of Kade's property and told the men there that he wanted to speak to his niece. They called me. I told them to let him in. He came to the office where I was working. He'd aged, I thought, or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years, outside the context of obligation. He looked at the monitors, the binders, the organized space that was mine. "Ivy," he said. "Roy," I said. "I heard you were still here," he said. "I am. I thought the arrangement was temporary." "It was," I said, "and then I made a new one." He looked around. His face was doing the calculation I recognized, trying to figure out where he stood, what angle was available, whether there was still something here he could leverage. "I'm your family," he said. "You traded me for a debt," I said. "I've been very clear in my own head about what that means." "Things were hard," he said. "I was in a bad spot." "Roy," I said, "I have every transaction you've made in the last 4 years documented in a spreadsheet. I know exactly how bad your spot was and what you did and didn't do to get out of it. You handed me over because it was easy, not because it was the only option." He was quiet. "I'm not going to help you," I said. "The debt is cleared. That's the end of your business with this organization. If you come here again, I'll ask Kade's people to make that conversation more formal than this one." Roy looked at me for a long time. I think he was waiting for me to soften. I'd spent years softening. I knew the shape of it from the inside. I knew what it felt like to start a sentence with something honest and then root it somewhere easier because the alternative cost too much. I didn't soften. He left. I stood at the window and watched the truck go down the road. I waited for something. Grief, maybe, or guilt, or the particular ache of a door closing on something you'd once hoped could be different. I waited a long time. What I felt mostly was the cold, clean air from the window, which Orla had cracked open an inch because she'd noticed I kept the office warm and thought the contrast helped me think. She was right. It did. I turned back to my work. The numbers were there where I'd left them, patient and precise, and I was exactly where I'd chosen to be, which was, in the end, the only kind of place worth being.